America isn't just a country on a map. It's a country living in its own magnificent, bewildering imagination of that map. Ask 10 Americans to point to Denver. You'll get 8 different states, one person tracing the shape of Texas with their finger, and someone asking if that's the city with the talking bears. This isn't ignorance. It's something more fascinating, a national talent for geographical creativity, where hard facts end, absolute, unshakable vibes begin. I witnessed this firsthand working at a tourism office in Tennessee. A man from Nebraska called, his voice brimming with vacation excitement. "I need your best seafood shack," he declared. "The one right on the Gulf." I gently mentioned the nearest ocean was roughly 1,000 miles away. There was a long, heavy silence. I could almost hear his mental map, that beautiful internal atlas, crumbling into pixels. "But Tennessee sounds coastal," he finally said, genuinely wounded. "It ends in sea. That implies a view." Of water, for him, linguistics trumped latitudes. The name was a promise the landscape had simply broken. It wasn't his fault reality was so poorly named. This, you see, is the classic American way. Geography not as a science, but as emotional inference. If it sounds warm, it must be south. If it sounds fancy or glamorous, it must be near a coast. Reality is merely a rough draft, open to our own passionate revisions and suggestions for improvement. Consider the perplexing case of the Carolinas. A woman once booked a flight to the original Carolina, please, when pressed. She clarified with complete sincerity, the one that isn't the knockoff. She landed in Charleston, South Carolina, ready for business. Her important meeting, however, was in Charlotte, North Carolina, 200 miles and an entirely different state away. Her solution was one of brilliant, bureaucratic logic. "They should really synchronize these places," she sighed, annoyed. "It's confusing on purpose." In her mind, state lines were an administrative error, not geographical facts. Why would you have two things with the same root name if they weren't, for all practical purposes, interchangeable and adjacent? Then there's the classic, almost mythological American relationship with Alaska. A traveler at a Seattle airport was fuming at the ticket counter. "Why is this flight taking 6 hours?" he demanded, pointing an accusatory finger at a decorative map on the wall, the kind where Alaska is helpfully tucked into a corner near Mexico for neat spacing. On this map, it's right there. He believed cartographic convenience was a travel guarantee, a contract between the mapmaker and the traveler. When the agent informed him Alaska was, in fact, far to the northwest of Canada, he stared blankly, his entire worldview on pause. Then why would they draw it down there? He asked a profound philosophical question. Why indeed? Sometimes, education means choosing tidy presentation over pesky, inconvenient truth. Our internal compass doesn't just point north. It often runs on pure cinematic logic. Americans don't navigate by miles. We navigate by movie scenes and television tropes. That's why Los Angeles, Miami, and New York feel like neighboring suburbs in the national psyche. They all live rent-free in the same film universe. Montana exists strictly for horseback drama and sweeping vistas. The Midwest is where movies pause for heartfelt speeches in cornfields. Our map isn't topographic. It's a screenplay. And we are all just trying to find our scene. I once met a man in Phoenix who was planning a grand road trip. "I'm driving to Honolulu next week," he announced proudly. I waited for the punchline. None came. "How does that work, exactly?" I asked, cautiously. "The bridge, of course," he said, utterly serious. "From California. I saw a documentary. It wasn't joking." He was a victim of too much creative editing, a soul who believed if you can drive to California, the bridge to paradise must logically follow. When I broke the news about the Pacific Ocean's rather significant and inconvenient placement, he was deeply skeptical. So every car in Hawaii was airdropped. He left our conversation not convinced of his error, but convinced there was a secret government tunnel system they simply weren't advertising. This unique mindset often treats nature less as an ancient, immutable force and more as a faulty product with questionable design choices. A tourist in Denver famously demanded a refund from her hotel because the altitude gave her a headache. "You built a city this high on purpose," she accused the bewildered clerk. "It's a clear design flaw. You need to install better air." For her, the Rocky Mountains weren't the result of millions of years of plate tectonics. They were a case of poor urban planning. The planet, in the American view, should accommodate. If it doesn't, you file a complaint. You ask for the manager of the continent. Our directional sense is profoundly psychological, not mathematical. Up is north, which means cold, serious, and probably full of stoic lumberjacks. Down is south, which means warm, relaxed, and likely to have better food. This leads to some glorious conclusions. A gentleman from Florida once explained to me with great authority that Alaska has stronger gravity. "It's higher up on the globe," he reasoned, making a lifting motion with his hands. "Things are closer to the pole center." When I mentioned the Earth as an oblate spheroid, he nodded sagely, as if I'd just proven his point. Exactly. The top of the ball has more spin force. He'd invented his own beautifully coherent astrophysics, a personal theory of everything that made perfect sense inside his head. Sometimes the confusion is born from the sheer, magnificent, overwhelming scale of the place. A family from New Jersey, while visiting Dallas, asked their server at a steakhouse, "What time does the evening tide come in?" The server, to his credit, politely explained the Gulf Coast was a solid 5-hour drive away. The father frowned at his phone, holding it up as evidence. But the weather app says coastal breeze. He believed meteorological terms were literal location services. If your phone says coastal, you are, by digital declaration, on a coast. The line between data and reality had not just blurred. It had been completely erased by a trusted algorithm. This creative geography extends to how we perceive other nations sharing the continent. A classic example is the vertical America theory. I once spent 20 patient minutes with a man in Detroit who was morally outraged he needed a passport to visit Toronto. "It's just upstairs," he argued, jabbing a thumb northward. "We're on the same land slab." In his mind, the continent was a neat, layered cake. Canada on the top tier, the U.S. in the middle, Mexico holding up the bottom. Borders were floors, not lines. Asking for a passport to go upstairs felt as unreasonable as his landlord charging him a fee to use the building elevator. Frankly, our educational maps bear some responsibility for this. Those brightly colored, flattened posters hanging in every classroom are less geography and more suggestive art. They teach us that states are neat jigsaw puzzle pieces with no inconvenient mountains spilling over borders or ecosystems bleeding across lines. A woman from Oregon once lamented to me the shocking deforestation of Nevada. Her proof was irrefutable to her. I zoomed in on Google Earth and saw a big brown patch right next door. She was, of course, looking at the deserts of Utah. The digital map had completely become the territory, and the territory was apparently committing ecological crimes against its neighbors. This confident, almost brazen reinterpretation reaches its peak with state identities themselves. A Texan influencer famously proclaimed on social media that her state enjoyed tri-coastal dominance: Pacific, Atlantic, and Gulf. When a follower gently noted Texas touches only the Gulf of Mexico, she clarified with flawless, unshakable logic: spiritually, it touches all three. Energy doesn't obey your petty maps. She wasn't wrong about the confidence part. In America, if you believe a place is coastal hard enough, with sufficient Texan swagger, the ocean eventually gets the memo. We increasingly approach geography like a user interface. If it's not intuitive, if it doesn't make sense at a glance, it's poorly designed and needs an update. A college student once argued with me that Idaho was slowly migrating northwest. Check the map updates, he insisted, entirely serious. The borders shift a little every year on my app. Had mistaken software improvements and clearer satellite imagery for active continental drift. In his defense, if an app can change, why can't Idaho? It's the Silicon Valley mindset applied to plate tectonics. Nothing is final. Everything is in beta, and disruptive innovation can move even mountains. This leads to some glorious, if utterly unmoored, urban planning suggestions. A visitor to Oklahoma City, after experiencing her first tornado warning, had a brilliant, simple solution. Why don't you just move the city? She asked the locals, genuinely trying to help. You know where the tornado alley is? It's right there on the map. Just build the town next to it. She saw natural disaster zones as fixed tracks, like subway lines, and cities as mobile stations that could simply roll a few miles down the rail. It was logistical, rational, and completely detached from earthly constraints like geology, infrastructure, and the lives of millions. Perhaps the most telling moment of all was with a man who insisted, against all evidence, that America has 52 states. You're forgetting the expansion packs, he said, completely earnest, when I listed the 50. D.C., Puerto Rico, Guam. They're like the DLC of America. He wasn't joking. He understood the nation through the flawless logic of video game downloads. You start with the base map, and then you add premium content. In his worldview, geography was a subscription service, and citizenship was a kind of downloadable content pack. So, what's really happening here? It's not mere stupidity. That's too simple, and it misses the poetry of it. It's a grand collision between vast, almost incomprehensible space and a culture of boundless can-do confidence. America is so big, so wildly varied in landscape and culture, that no single human mind can hold it all accurately. So we fill the cavernous gaps not with studied knowledge, but with intuition, with stories, with the sheer gravitational pull of our own assumptions. We replace terra incognita with terra fabula, the land of fable. The advent of GPS has only deepened this peculiar trait. Why memorize when you can outsource your sense of direction to a satellite? But this has created a new kind of conflict, when the calm voice of Siri says proceed east, and east feels wrong in your gut. We argue with the disembodied voice. A woman in Pennsylvania once told me her navigation was fundamentally broken because it kept pointing her toward New York City. That can't be east, she insisted, her voice firm. East is the ocean. New York is forward. She had seamlessly replaced cardinal directions with narrative direction. Forward was plot, progress, story. East was just a boring side character with no lines. This, then, is the grand, humorous, uniquely American project, to mentally reshape an entire continent to better fit our innate sense of story, our demand for convenience, and our deep need for emotional resonance. We don't outright deny geography. That would be rude. We just politely, persistently suggest it could be so much more user-friendly. If only it would listen to our feedback. If this tour through our national cartographic confusion brought a smile to your face, do us a solid. Hit that like button. It tells the algorithm that this kind of content, exploring the delightful quirks of how people think, why cultures clash, and the hidden funny patterns in our everyday chaos is worth sharing. And subscribe for more. We're just getting started mapping the magnificent mess of the human mind. Because in the end, maybe the American approach isn't so wrong after all. The map is not the territory. The map is a story. And sometimes the territory is infinitely more fun, more surprising, and more alive when you have the courage, or the sheer charming obliviousness to draw the map yourself.